41 of the cattle you've driven into that ring are mine." That was how the auctioneer's count got cut clean down the middle at the Elko sale barn. The voice belonged to a 58-year-old widow who had stepped forward from the back rows, wearing an old canvas coat that had been her late husband's, Della Hartwell. In the ring, a crowded lot of cattle bearing the brand of Vickers Land and Cattle, the biggest cattle company in 3 counties, stood for sale. No one took her seriously because the cattle in that ring carried the brand of Vickers, the biggest cattle company in 3 counties, and Della Hartwell was a woman who had buried her husband 3 years before and ran a small operation alone. But Della knew those cattle too well for another brand to hide them, and no one yet knew. What would decide everything that day was neither the gavel nor the vicar's name. It was a book a brand inspector had not yet opened. Cole Stedman, the vicar's foreman, spoke from the edge of the ring with the ease of a man in no hurry. "Hartwell, these cattle came down off the shared range up top. Every one of them carries our brand." He paused a moment, then softened his voice, which somehow cut deeper than his hardness. "A few head get mixed every fall. You know that as well as anyone. I knew Tom. He was a good man. Let the men handle this." A few people nodded. Someone at the back let out a short, low laugh. The auctioneer took up his gavel but didn't bring it down. His eyes moved from Stedman to the woman. Della didn't say a word. All she did was reach into the inside pocket of her coat, draw out a folded sheaf of papers, and smooth them slowly with both hands. And the room went quiet, because in the silence of this woman who did not shout, did not cry, did not argue, there was something that cut the laugh off all at once. To understand Della Hartwell, you have to know that she learned to read a brand long before she learned to read a book. Her father ran cattle in a valley at the foot of the Ruby Mountains, and he would sit little Della down beside him when she was no more than 8 and have her read the marks on the cattle's hindquarters, one by one. How a brand burns, how it heals, how the hair grows back over it across the years. These were things her father showed her rather than told her. By the time Della married Tom Hartwell at 21, her husband's family brand had been burning in that valley for years already. A rocking H, the letter H set on a quarter circle, put on the left hip, entered into the state records in 1931 by Tom's father. There was a recorded mark on the cattle's right ear, too. A small notch cut from the lower edge. Tom taught Della one rule and repeated it for years. The brand is your word, but the paper is its witness. Always keep the paper. That was why Della never threw away the brand inspection certificates handed to her after every sale, after every crossing of a county line. She kept them all in a tin in the kitchen cupboard, arranged by year. When Tom died in 1969, what was left to Della was not only land and cattle, a brand, an earmark, and being the only person in the whole region who knew exactly what they meant, were left to her as well. Running that operation alone for 3 years had been anything but easy. To get through the winter, she depended on the money from the calves she sold each fall. Hay was expensive, the payments were tight, and on a small place a bad fall would often affect the next one too. For years the men in town had implied the work was too big for her. Della had answered none of them. Instead of answering, she had risen before everyone else each morning, branded every calf with her own hand, set down every figure in her own ledger. The calluses on her hands were the proof of it. So were the papers in that tin in the kitchen cupboard, arranged by year. She did not talk, but she forgot nothing her eyes had seen. And that fall, this quiet thoroughness that no one had reckoned with would, in a way no one expected, become her strongest card. Vickers Land and Cattle, on the other hand, was an entirely different world. Tens of thousands of acres, hundreds of head, a name known across the state. Old Harlan Vickers was a courteous, respected, self-assured man. which is to say he was not a bad man, only a man who never doubted he was in the right. His cattle and Della's grazed together all summer on the same forest range in the Ruby Mountains, on the same slopes, as they had for decades. Up in the high country, cattle mixed and herds ran together. This was a perfectly ordinary fact of sharing a common range. That was why a big sorting was needed every fall, and who did that sorting and how changed everything. And it was this very ordinary fact that was about to bring trouble down on Della that fall. That October, Vickers's crew made the big gather in the high country. Riders, dogs, trucks. That long descent repeated every fall. When a big company makes a gather, it drives everything down together and does the sorting below. And out of habit, it runs its own brand on every animal it brings down, because it assumes everything it has gathered belongs to it. Among the herd that came off the mountain that day were 41 head of Dellas, the rocking H on their left hips, that small notch in their right ears. No one stopped to look. No one cut them out. They were loaded straight onto Vickers's trucks and came the 35 miles to the sale barn in Elko. Della learned what had happened only on the morning of the sale, when she reached the barn. Walking among the pens, the right ear of an animal in the Vickers sale pen caught her eye, and she slowed her step. She looked through the rails. On the cattle's right hips was Vickers's fresh, newly burned brand. But on the left hip, healed over years ago, her own rocking H still stood, and that notch in the right ear was hers too. Della recognized them. Her own cattle, 41 head, a herd carrying a whole year of her life, now waiting to be sold under another's brand, under another's name. Most people would have either shouted at that point or backed away in helplessness. Della did neither. Because when Stedman the foreman told her to let the men handle it, she knew something he did not. In that state, no animal could be sold without a brand inspector's inspection, without its ownership changing hands. That inspection was the law, it was required, and it could be done only in daylight. The inspector reads every brand and mark on the animal, and if he cannot determine ownership, he holds the animal. Della turned not to the crowd, but straight to the auctioneer and spoke in a calm, level voice. These cattle need a brand inspector's inspection before they're sold. Send for him. A murmur rippled through the room, because the man doing the barn's inspection that day was there, standing right beside the ring. State Brand Inspector Bert Leslie. A hard-faced man who owed nothing to anyone and had given years to this work. The question was no longer whether Della was right. The question was whether, in that moment when the whole region was ready to lean on the vicar's name, Bert Leslie would rubber stamp what the big company said, or do his job by the book. Leslie walked toward the pens, drew a small, worn-edged book from his pocket, and looked at the first animal's hip. Bert Leslie was not a man who worked in a hurry, and he did not hurry that day either. He stepped up beside the first animal, felt its hip with his hand, and saw both brands. On the right hip, Vickers's fresh brand, its edges still swollen. On the left hip, an older mark, burned years ago, the hair grown back over it. He took a small pair of clippers from his pocket and carefully clipped the hair over the mark on the left hip. When the hair came away, what lay beneath was unmistakable. A rocking H, burned years before, fully healed, an old brand. Leslie looked at it for a moment, then at the fresh Vickers brand. The difference in age between the two would not escape an expert's eye. Stedman called out from the edge of the ring, still sure of himself. "Inspector, that's our brand, right there." Without lifting his head, Leslie answered, "They're both right there. The question is which one is older." No one in the barn was talking anymore. Everyone was watching the old inspector's little clippers and his bent head. Then Leslie looked for the thing that really mattered. Beside the rocking H, was there a vent brand cancelling it? When an animal is sold, the former owner's brand is voided with such a cancellation brand. It is the visible proof of a sale. There was no such brand on the left hip, which meant this animal had never been sold by the owner whose rocking H it carried. The inspector moved to the animal's right ear, a small notch cut from the lower edge, the exact match of the Hartwell mark in the records. Then he straightened, wiped his hands on his trousers, and turned to Stedman. "Do you have a bill of sale or a brand inspection certificate showing these 41 head passed from Hartwell to Vickers?" Stedman hesitated a moment. "They came down in our gather." In the same calm tone, Leslie repeated, "I'm asking for a bill of sale. I'm asking for paper." No answer came because there was no such paper, and in a brand inspector's world, a claim with no paper behind it is only a voice. At that point, Leslie opened the book in his pocket. Inside it was the record of the registered brands in that state and of the inspections that had passed through his hands over the years. He found the rocking H, registered to the Hartwell name since 1931, left hip. Then he turned to Della. She was already holding out the papers from the tin she had brought from the kitchen cupboard. Brand inspection certificates arranged by year, each bearing the same brand and the same mark. Leslie looked at a few of them and wrote something in his book. Then he turned not to the crowd, but straight to Harlan Vickers, and spoke in a level voice. "These 41 head are Hartwell's. The brand's registered, there's no vent, there's no transfer paper, and the earmark matches. They're coming out of the sale." The ring fell into such a silence that the idle of a truck outside reached all the way in. Stedman started to say something, but Harlan Vickers raised his hand slightly and stopped him. The old man looked at the cattle a while, then turned to Della. "Tom kept good records," he said. "I should have remembered that." There was no anger in his voice, only the heavy calm of a man admitting, for the first time in his life, that he was wrong in front of everyone. And this seemed like the place the story would end. But Leslie had not closed his book yet. He turned another page and recorded that a fresh brand had been put on cattle that weren't theirs. He did it not to punish anyone, but only because he was doing his job by the book. Yet that one line would set other things in motion later. After that fall, the gathers in the high country no longer went the way they once had. The big companies began sorting the herds they brought down before loading them onto trucks, and looking before, they put an iron to them. And the small operations that shared the forest range learned that their own cattle would not be lost in someone else's load. A single inspection that one woman had insisted on had quietly changed a habit a whole region had looked past for years. Sometimes the thing that sets a whole order right is not a law, but a single person asking the right question at the right moment. Those 41 head went back into the ring that day, this time under the Hartwell name. Della's cows and that spring's calves sold for a little over $320 a head at that fall's prices. $13,140 in all. For a small operation, that was not just a sale. It was a whole winter's hay, the answer to the payment coming due, one more year of staying on her feet. Della took the money, signed the auctioneer's clerk's book, and walked toward the pens to load her cattle onto her own truck. Some of the men who for years had thought the work was too big for her watched her go that day. One touched the brim of his hat. Another nodded. Della only lowered her head in return. No air of triumph, no reproach. Because what she had proven that day was not only that she knew cattle, it was that she knew her own better than anyone. Today, years on from that fall, there is still a story told around Elko. To young ranchers, on the very day they brand their first calves, the old men say the same thing. Keep your papers. Register your brand. Don't forget your earmark. Because one day, when no one will believe your word, only paper will save you. Della Hartwell ran that place for years more. The tin in the kitchen cupboard with its papers still sits arranged by year. That October morning, in the moment when a whole room was ready to turn to the powerful man's word, what decided everything was neither the auctioneer's gavel nor the vicar's name. It was a book a brand inspector opened and a few papers a woman had learned to keep decades before. Tom had been right. A brand is a person's word, but paper is its witness. And a brand is the law in this state. Maybe you too have had a day like it. A moment when everyone believed the powerful man's word, when no one asked you, and what you knew was enough. Maybe you didn't shout. Maybe you didn't even have to defend yourself. You just waited for the right moment and for the right thing in your hand. This channel is for exactly these kinds of people. The ones who stay quiet, the ones who are patient, and the moments when one small piece of paper no one looked at silenced a whole room. If stories like this mean something to you, you may want to subscribe and stay, because there are many more to tell, and you may find yourself in them.